In the quiet village of Eldenwood, nestled between gnarled forests and mist-covered hills, there existed a house that the locals only spoke of in hushed whispers. The old Wickersham place, as it was known, had stood empty for decades, its history marred by strange occurrences and tragic mishaps. It was here that our story begins, on a chilly autumn night, with the arrival of the Harrow family. The Harrows, oblivious to the chilling reputation of their new home, were an ordinary family. Michael, a schoolteacher, his wife Helen, a freelance writer, and their son Jacob, who was just 8 years old. Their move to Eldenwood was supposed to be a fresh start, away from the hectic pace of the city. The house, despite its dilapidated exterior, was spacious and affordable, a perfect place to raise a family, or so they thought. As they settled in, it was Jacob who first sensed that something was amiss. It began with small, inexplicable events. Toys that moved on their own, cold spots in his room, and a constant feeling of being watched. But it was the voices that truly unnerved him. Low, whispering voices that called out to him at night, growing increasingly insistent and clear. "Jacob," they would hiss, "come play with us." Initially, Jacob believed these whispers to be the product of his imagination, fueled by the stress of the move and his new surroundings. However, as the days passed, the voices grew more persistent. One night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Jacob followed the whispers to the attic. The attic was cluttered with old furniture and boxes filled with forgotten belongings of previous occupants. As he moved deeper into the shadows, the air grew inexplicably colder. The whispers intensified, guiding him to a small hidden door in the far corner of the attic. Behind the door, Jacob discovered a room that wasn't on the floor plans, a child's playroom, untouched by time. Dusty toys littered the floor, and drawings of grotesque figures adorned the walls. In the center of the room stood an old wooden rocking horse, moving gently as if recently used. Terrified yet transfixed, Jacob approached the rocking horse. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar as he touched it. Suddenly, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. Whirling around, he found himself staring into the empty air. But the touch was real, palpable and chilling. Jacob ran from the attic, the echoes of laughter chasing him down the stairs. Shaken, Jacob told his parents about the experience, but Michael and Helen attributed it to his overactive imagination. However, that night, Helen experienced her own unexplainable encounter. As she passed the attic door, she heard the faint sound of a child giggling. Intrigued and unnerved, she opened the door, only to find the attic silent and empty. As the incidents escalated, the Harrows could no longer deny that their home harbored unseen inhabitants. Desperate for answers, Helen began to research the history of the Wickersham house. She learned that it had once been owned by a reclusive widow, Mrs. Wickersham, who was rumored to have been deeply involved in the occult. The villagers spoke of a tragic event where her only son, Theodore, had mysteriously disappeared, never to be found. They said Mrs. Wickersham had never stopped searching for him, her spirit lingering, forever waiting for her lost child. The realization that they were not alone in the house hit Helen like a cold wave. Determined to protect her family, she decided to delve deeper into the house's past, hoping to find a way to appease the spirits and reclaim their home. But as she would soon discover, some doors once opened can never be closed. The whispers in the dark were just the beginning. As autumn deepened into winter, the Harrows found themselves increasingly entangled in the eerie grip of their home. Helen's research into the house's history became an obsession. Each piece of information seemed to draw her deeper into a web of mystery and darkness. Meanwhile, Michael watched with growing concern as both his wife and son became shadows of their former selves, consumed by the house and its haunting. One crisp November evening, Helen sat surrounded by old newspapers, books on spiritualism, and handwritten notes. Her eyes, underscored by dark circles, flickered with a mix of fear and determination as she pieced together the tragic tale of the Wickersham family. The more she uncovered, the more the house seemed to react. Lights flickered, doors slammed shut without wind, and the temperature would often drop sharply, as if the house itself was breathing cold despair into their lives. Helen discovered an old diary in the attic, buried beneath a loose floorboard in the eerie playroom. It belonged to Mrs. Wickersham and detailed her descent into madness following the disappearance of her son Theodore. The diary entries were erratic, filled with passages from arcane texts and sketches of strange symbols that Helen could not identify. One passage, however, stood out. A ritual that Mrs. Wickersham believed could bring her son back by opening a door to the other side. Meanwhile, Jacob's encounters grew more disturbing. The childlike whispers evolved into urgent, pleading voices. His toys would be found arranged in circles, and his drawings began to show scenes of a dark, twisted forest that he claimed to visit in his dreams. One morning, Helen found him talking to an empty chair at the breakfast table, insisting that Theodore was sitting there, cold and lonely, asking for help to come home. Frightened for her son, Helen shared her findings with Michael, who had remained skeptical until he experienced the undeniable himself. One night, he saw the ghostly figure of a small boy standing at the foot of their bed. The boy was pale with hollow eyes, and he vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving behind a chill that no blanket could warm. Convinced that they were dealing with more than mere hauntings, the Harrows decided to seek external help. They contacted a local historian, Mr. Aldridge, who was familiar with the legends surrounding the Wickersham house. Mr. Aldridge advised them to tread carefully, as meddling with the spiritual energies of such a place could have unforeseen consequences. Undeterred, Helen convinced Michael to perform the ritual mentioned in Mrs. Wickersham's diary. They prepared the attic according to the instructions in the old book, drawing symbols on the floor and lighting candles around the room. The air grew tense as they started reciting the incantations, not knowing what to expect. As the ritual reached its peak, the house trembled, and a howling wind surged through the rooms, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, they heard the sound of a child sobbing. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything fell silent. They waited, hearts pounding, until the lights flickered back on. At first, it seemed that nothing had changed, but then they noticed it. Theodore's old rocking horse, previously still in the dusty corner, was now gently rocking by itself. Terrified but determined, Helen approached the rocking horse. As she laid her hand on it, the room grew icy cold, and the voice of a child whispered directly into her ear. "Thank you, but it's not enough. Help me come home." Shaken to her core, Helen realized that the ritual was only the beginning. To bring peace to the house and save her family, she would have to confront the dark forces that had claimed Theodore, and now threatened Jacob. After the ritual, the atmosphere in the Wickersham house grew even more oppressive. It was as if they had disturbed something ancient and malevolent that refused to return to the shadows. Helen and Michael, driven by a mix of fear and responsibility, were determined to find a resolution, not only for their family's safety, but possibly to right the wrongs of the past. In the weeks that followed, Helen dove deeper into her research, seeking out experts in paranormal phenomena and the occult. She consulted with mediums who were reluctant to enter the house but offered guidance from a safe distance. They suggested that the ritual may have partially opened a gateway, and that completing it could either banish the spirits or unleash something far worse. Michael, once a skeptic, had become a staunch protector, his own encounters with the inexplicable having eroded his disbelief. He fortified the house with salt and symbols of protection, and took to accompanying Jacob everywhere, fearful of leaving him alone even for a moment. Jacob, for his part, became more withdrawn, often staring into space, murmuring to unseen companions. The breaking point came one stormy night, when the boundaries between worlds seemed to thin out even further. As thunder rolled and lightning illuminated the sky, the Harrows experienced a night of terrifying activity. Doors banged open and shut, a cacophony of whispers filled the air, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath fogged in the air. During this chaos, Jacob screamed from his room. Rushing to his side, Michael and Helen found him thrashing in bed, his eyes wide with fear as he pointed to the corner of the room. "He's here! Theodore, he's here and he's scared!" Jacob cried out. Gathering their courage, Helen and Michael decided that they could not wait any longer. They needed to complete the ritual, to either help Theodore find peace or close the gateway for good. With the storm as their backdrop, they prepared the attic once more, this time with every protective talisman and symbol they could muster. The family started the ritual, reciting the incantations with more confidence and determination than before. As they did, the wind seemed to howl in response, and the house trembled. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if pressure was building within the walls themselves. Then, at the climax of the ritual, a blinding flash of lightning struck nearby, illuminating the figure of a small boy standing in the middle of the ritual circle. It was Theodore, his appearance ghostly pale and his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Help me," he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. Helen stepped forward, her motherly instincts overriding her fear. "Theodore, we want to help you. Tell us how to let you rest," she pleaded. Theodore looked at Jacob, then back at Helen and Michael. "The book," he said, pointing towards Mrs. Wickersham's diary, which lay open on a nearby table. "Finish the story." Puzzled but driven by a desperate hope, Helen picked up the diary and noticed a page she had previously overlooked, hidden by a folded corner. It contained the final part of the ritual, not just to open the gateway, but to close it, ensuring that no spirit would remain trapped or tormented in their world. With renewed urgency, Helen read aloud the closing incantations. The house responded with a low groan, and the temperature started to normalize. As she spoke the final words, Theodore smiled, a look of relief spreading across his face. "Thank you," he whispered, just as his figure began to fade, the air around him shimmering until he disappeared completely. The storm outside calmed, and for the first time since they had moved into the Wickersham house, the Harrows felt a sense of peace. Exhausted but relieved, they hugged each other, feeling the weight of fear and tension lift from their shoulders. They had faced the unknown and come through it, not unscathed, but together and stronger. The morning after the ritual, the Harrow family awoke to a house bathed in sunlight, its corners free of the oppressive shadows that had lingered for so long. The air felt lighter, and even the usual creaks and groans of the old Wickersham house seemed less sinister. For the first time in months, there was a palpable sense of calm. The spirits, it seemed, were finally at rest. Helen walked through the house, her steps tentative but hopeful. She noticed the small changes, the absence of cold drafts, the silence where there had once been whispers, and the peaceful stillness that now filled the rooms. As she entered the kitchen, she found Michael making breakfast, a rare smile on his face. Jacob played at the table, his laughter genuine and free from fear. The normalcy of the scene filled her heart with relief and gratitude. Later that day, the Harrows invited Mr. Aldridge, the local historian, to their home. He arrived with a curious expression, his eyes scanning the house as if trying to sense the change Helen had told him about over the phone. As they sat in the living room, Helen recounted the events of the previous night, the appearance of Theodore, and how they had completed the ritual. Mr. Aldridge listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You've done something remarkable," he finally said. "Not only have you helped a lost soul find peace, but you may have also broken a cycle of torment that has plagued this land for generations. This house," he paused, looking around, "it feels different, healed even." Encouraged by Mr. Aldridge's words, Michael shared his own reflections. "I was a skeptic," he admitted. "I never believed in things I couldn't see or explain. But what happened here, what we experienced and ultimately overcame, it's changed my perspective. There's more to this world than what meets the eye." The conversation turned to the future. The Harrows discussed the possibility of using their experience to help others who might be facing similar paranormal disturbances. Helen felt a new purpose awakening within her, a desire to understand and perhaps bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen. In the following weeks, the Harrow family began to reach out to their community. They shared their story with caution, aware of how incredible it sounded. To their surprise, many in Eldenwood responded with stories of their own, of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. It became clear that the Harrows were not alone in their experiences. Helen started a blog to document these stories, calling it Echoes of Eldenwood. It quickly gained a following, with people from all over sharing their encounters with the supernatural. The blog became a space for exchange and support, helping others to understand and cope with the paranormal. As spring approached, the Wickersham house underwent a transformation. With the dark past behind them, the Harrows renovated the home, brightening the interiors and clearing out the remnants of its troubled history. They planted a garden where once the overgrown weeds had seemed almost sentient, now bloomed with life and color. One day, while tending to the garden, Helen found a small old toy car buried in the soil. She cleaned it off and placed it on the living room mantel as a reminder of the past and how far they had come. It was no longer a symbol of fear, but one of resilience and new beginnings. Jacob, now more vibrant and cheerful, claimed he no longer heard voices or saw unsettling visions. However, he maintained a keen interest in the history of their home and often sat with Mr. Aldridge, listening intently to the tales of Eldenwood. His experiences had given him a unique connection to the house and its history, a connection he cherished rather than feared. As the anniversary of their arrival at the Wickersham house approached, the Harrows planned a small gathering to celebrate their journey. The community came together in their garden, under the stars, sharing food and stories. It was a warm, festive atmosphere, a stark contrast to the isolation and fear that had once permeated their home. That night, as the guests left and the Harrows sat together, watching the fireflies dance, several months passed, and the Harrow family settled into a peaceful routine, their lives marked by a newfound sense of community and purpose. Eldenwood had embraced them, and their story had become a beacon of hope and curiosity. However, the tranquility of their existence was about to be tested once more. As autumn returned to Eldenwood, bringing with it the rustling of dry leaves and the crisp evening air, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere around the Wickersham house. It started with small, almost negligible incidents, a fleeting shadow at the corner of one's eye, a whisper carried by the wind, a chill that lingered a bit too long. Helen first noticed the change during one of her morning walks through the garden. The toy car she had placed on the mantel was inexplicably back in the dirt, partially buried near the roses. Puzzled, she cleaned it off and returned it to its spot inside the house, dismissing the incident as a curious anomaly. However, as the days shortened and the nights grew longer, these minor disturbances became more frequent and pronounced. Jacob, now a year older and more perceptive, mentioned seeing figures in the woods bordering their property. He described them not as threatening, but as lost, wandering souls who seemed confused and restless. Concerned, Helen and Michael revisited the history of their home and its surroundings. They consulted with Mr. Aldridge again, who suggested that the completion of the ritual might have had unintended consequences, possibly affecting other spiritual entities connected to the land. Determined to protect their home and family, Helen resumed her studies into the paranormal, delving deeper into the lore and spiritual history of Eldenwood. Her research led her to ancient legends of the area, tales of spirits bound to the earth, their restlessness fueled by unresolved grievances and ancient tragedies. Meanwhile, Michael reached out to the community, organizing meetings with other residents who had experienced or knew of supernatural occurrences. These gatherings soon turned into regular sessions where people shared their stories and sought advice. The Harrows realized that their home was not the only locus of paranormal activity in Eldenwood. Rather, it was part of a larger tapestry woven through the very land on which the town was built. With Halloween approaching, the disturbances increased. The community, already sensitive to the legends surrounding Eldenwood, grew anxious. The Harrows decided to host a gathering on Halloween night, aiming to unify the town's energy and perhaps calm the restless spirits with a show of solidarity and respect. The night of the gathering, the Harrows' home was filled with neighbors, each bringing their own experiences and hopes for peace. Candles were lit, and circles of salt were laid at every doorway and window. Helen prepared a special ceremony, drawing on her research to appease the spirits. She invoked their names, acknowledged their presence, and offered them release from their earthly bindings. As the clock struck midnight, a profound silence fell over the house. A mist seemed to rise from the ground outside, enveloping the property in a soft white shroud. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the mist dissipated, and the air felt clear and still. In the days that followed, Eldenwood returned to its peaceful ways. The shadows retreated, the whispers faded, and a sense of normalcy resumed. Helen and Michael, bolstered by the support of their community, felt a renewed confidence in their role as keepers of the Wickersham legacy. Yet, as they would soon learn, some shadows linger longer than others, and peace is often a delicate balance between light and darkness. The journey of the Harrow family was far from over, their connection to the supernatural world continuing to unfold in ways they had yet to imagine. In the wake of the Halloween gathering, Eldenwood enjoyed a period of calm that lasted through the winter. Snow blanketed the village, casting it in a serene quietude that seemed almost magical. The Harrow family embraced this peace, yet Helen remained vigilant, aware that the stillness might only be a temporary respite. As spring heralded the rebirth of the natural world, Helen's intuition proved correct. The disturbances began anew, though subtly at first. It started with the wildlife around their home behaving oddly. Birds circling the house without landing, deer staring towards the house from the edge of the woods as if seeing something invisible to human eyes. Helen documented these occurrences, trying to discern patterns or triggers. One afternoon, while reviewing her notes, Helen discovered a correlation between the disturbances and the phases of the moon. The activity seemed to peak during the new moon, a time traditionally associated with endings and new beginnings. Intrigued, she shared her findings with Michael, who suggested they align their protective rituals with the lunar cycle to strengthen their efforts. Meanwhile, Jacob, now deeply attuned to the house and its history, began to experience vivid dreams about Eldenwood's past. In these dreams, he saw the village as it had been centuries ago, teeming with settlers and indigenous tribes, a land marked by cooperation but also conflict. These visions were not threatening but were filled with messages of healing and coexistence. Encouraged by Jacob's dreams, Helen reached out to local historians and indigenous leaders, seeking to understand the land's deeper history. This collaboration uncovered old treaties and sacred sites, long forgotten but still resonant with spiritual energy. The community, inspired by these revelations, began to work towards acknowledging and honoring this rich heritage, hoping to heal the wounds of the past that still affected their present. As the next new moon approached, the Harrows prepared for a significant ritual, one that would involve the entire community. They gathered at a recently rediscovered sacred site in the woods, a clearing at the convergence of two streams, known in local lore as a place of power. Here, they combined their efforts to conduct a ceremony that blended old traditions with new understanding, seeking harmony with the spirit world. That night, under the dark velvet sky, the air pulsated with a tangible energy. The community stood hand in hand, forming a circle around the clearing. Helen led the ceremony, her voice steady and clear as she recited invocations of peace and closure. As the ritual reached its climax, a gentle breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves and cooling the faces of those gathered. In the silence that followed, a collective sense of accomplishment filled the air. Many reported feeling a lightness, as if a weight had been lifted from the land itself. It was a moment of profound connection between the past and the present, the living and the spectral. As the seasons turned, the Harrow family continued to live in the Wickersham house, their lives weaving through the fabric of Eldenwood's history. The disturbances lessened dramatically, and when they did occur, they were more like echoes, gentle reminders, rather than ominous warnings. Helen's blog evolved into a book, Echoes of Eldenwood, A Journey Through the Veil, which became a touchstone for those experiencing the paranormal, providing insight and guidance. Michael, once a skeptic, now led tours of Eldenwood's historical sites, sharing the village's haunted history with a mix of reverence and pride. Jacob grew up with a deep respect for both the natural and the supernatural, his early experiences shaping him into a thoughtful young man with an unusual depth of understanding for the mysteries of the world. In the end, the Harrow family learned that their journey was not just about facing the darkness, but embracing it as a part of life's tapestry. They found that in every shadow, there is a story, and in every whisper, a lesson. And as the cycles of the moon continued to turn, so too did the cycles of their lives ever onward, intertwined with the spirits of Eldenwood.